I'll tell you, intimidation is having 25 minutes worth of talking and having only 20 minutes to talk and having the timekeeper be a CIA guy. I'm going to do my best. My job is to talk about what has happened to the refugees, the Tibetan refugees in Nepal, what the situation is today in Nepal. Many of these guys who gave up their lives to fight for their country are in very, very poor circumstances in refugee camps in Nepal, and I'd like to address what's happening today and bring you up to date. Since 1960, His Holiness the Dalai Lama's government in exile had an office and a representative in Nepal. It became a tradition that lasted unchallenged for 45 years. This was a situation in Nepal that was never officially recognized by any of the various governments who have had their 15 minutes of fame in Nepal. Whether those regimes be beneficial or benevolent kings, prime ministers, or despots hiding behind the high walls of the royal palace. This changed a year and a half ago, in January of 2005, when the government in exile's relationship with Nepal was seriously downgraded. The then Prime Minister of Nepal decided to close down the Dalai Lama's office in Kathmandu, just 1 week before King Gyanendra took over the country by military force. He sacked that very same Prime Minister, as well as all democratically elected officials in Nepal. The doors to Parliament were shut, and literally, overnight, the king turned a constitutional monarchy into a dictatorship. As for the Tibetan refugees, all bets were off. Now, in light of what has happened in the last month, and I'm sure many of you have been watching this in the news, the 18-day shutdown of the country, the massive demonstrations, the king stepping aside, the parliament being reinstated, etc., it would seem that the 300-year-old monarchy is on its last leg. Mind you, as long as the king controls the army, and he still does, all of this optimism, recently voiced by human rights activists and international journalists, is sheer wishful thinking. Nothing has really changed in Nepal. The people may be dancing in the streets right now, but as long as the army remains controlled by this king, celebrations in Nepal are frightfully premature. But here's my point. No matter who holds the reins of power in Nepal, and this includes the Maoists, they prevail, who, by the way, control 80% of the landmass in Nepal. In fact, everything except for the Kathmandu Valley. No matter who controls this country, in the last few years, Nepal has become and will remain a close friend of China. And the only way an impoverished, landlocked, war-torn little country like Nepal can remain a good friend of China is to condone China's one China policy. That is to say, yes, Great China, we agree, Great China, Tibet is and always has been a part of Great China. Everyone in Nepal knows this is a lie. But China can count on Nepal to sustain its carefully manicured lie. It's all about economics. Nepal wants Beijing money. Nepal needs the many promises of foreign aid given by China. And unfortunately, this puts the issue of the well-being of Tibetan refugees at the very bottom of the totem pole. Now, before I go on, I should differentiate between the Tibetans who now have Nepalese citizenship, and there are not that many, and the vast majority who have only refugee status. Of the 20,000 refugees in Nepal, approximately 13,000 have received these ID cards known as Refugee Registration Certification, which allows them to stay in the country, but that's about it. Can they buy a car? No. Can they own a home? No. Can they get legal employment? No. If they get a job illegally and are exploited, do they have any legal recourse? No. Some of you, maybe many of you, have been to Kathmandu and eaten in Tibetan restaurants. In reality, Nepalese citizens owned those Tibetan restaurants. Westerners must understand this distinction. Otherwise, they get confused and assume when they see Tibetan businesses that there is no problem in Nepal. We go to Bodhanath and circumambulate around the Great White Stupa. We climb the hill and see the Monkey Temple and the view of Kathmandu Valley. And we see all the little Tibetan shops, and we purchase things from the little Tibetan shops. They're all illegal. Because they are Tibetan operated, they can and often are closed at any time by the Nepalese authorities, presumably whenever the shopkeepers do not or cannot meet local police bribes.